2016 and the age of vote manipulation. Misrepresentation of the majority. By age group manipulation. Intelligence division. Gerrymandering manipulation by area. First past the post manipulation and proportional misrepresentation. A plethora of propagandist media lies and misdirection which is guilty of detrimental social engineering. Give me 30 minutes of your time and I will give you a snapshot insight into how your lifestyle is being destroyed behind your back by governments and mainstream news. I say all those things you never want to hear and should be avoided at dinner parties. Politically correct is dead. Look what it has done to destroy the planet in the past 30 years by being dishonest and holding back on telling the truth. There is no need to be rude, but the truth is often unsavory and must not be denied. Introduction. In 2015 and 2016 a big fuss and media splurge of inaccurate manipulative polls has been made about voting, turning it into a TV game show comparable to some competitive Nazi sports event which have resulted in a primal scream from the voters in the final results. The sick side of this is that the votes affect the lives of everyone around and is not a game, as it gives power to a well-established group of power-hungry fascist control freaks wishing to fill their pockets with the wealth created by the rank-and-file members of society. This presentation goes some way to shine a light on the scam being shoved in the faces of all those unqualified to vote, and that is most of those making a mark on a voting slip who do not understand what on earth is the reality of what they are voting for. Introduction, continued. There are many flavors of democracy, all of which define that the population within that democracy has the ability to vote on its operational policies. However, these are either denied by the government administration shielding of votes by unequal voter level misrepresentatives who have no education in ecology or science, and or by creating some voting scam. 4 of these are outlined here in this presentation that are used by the empty vessels making the most noise, that they spearhead democracy and are an embarrassment to decent society. This presentation does not cover the media propaganda techniques used to influence age and IQ demographics in what has become a government-sponsored TV game show destroying the lives of all involved. Observation 1. In 2016 we have seen the first big failures by the group who sell themselves as the champions of democracy in the UK and the USA. Those who wish social control without any financial responsibility and who have destroyed economies. They have played their own democracy game into failure, even sucking down those who call themselves green. Green parties have showed themselves to be one of the disenfranchised liberals who support a coalition of backstabbing, selfish, greedy minorities, each vying for a larger slice of the cake for themselves. The new Greens no more represent the productive primary sector farmers or ecology than the neoliberals represent the hordes of tertiary sector city service dependents. Although the cities vote Democrat Liberal and the rural areas vote Republican or Conservative. Observation 2. The true green ideals which are not promoted are very similar to the right-wing control of society and finance by a few in a master-slave ownership hierarchy, but instead fundamental green promotes a lifestyle choice of self-control and following the laws of nature, being a master of oneself and offering oneself to the community in order to sustain it rather than take from it. This paradigm removes the enforcement that the right and left wing promote through socially divisive lawfare and media advertisement of the inequality of the Joneses, now ingrained in the social psyche that began in the TV advertising of the 1950s. The green parties that have emerged have become a bunch of kids singing and making paper flowers from trees they are still chopping down to make money without promoting a sound financial policy that the Democrat liberals have also failed to do and who have plunged the world into debt. Observation 3. This wastrel behavior has left the door open to the patriotic flag-waving, Bible-thumping, right-wing purveyors of the natural law, and the religious domination of some neo-aristocratic patriarch leadership group supporting its own cozy lifestyles while offering a trickle-down of gilded excrement on its followers who lap it up as they are too uneducated and inexperienced to discern shit from chicken. Or can taste the difference. We see the primary sector farmers who feed the nations and who have been kept in blissful ignorance by keeping education out of their reach goaded to following the religious flag-waving spokesman. They do this because they have not been educated enough to question why they are following a pack of lies, but they indeed cover the majority of the country, as can be seen in the USA Republican response by county. The state results being a scam of vote juggling that we outline below. The winning vote is by area, not by the greater populations in the national ghettos of tertiary sector dependent cities. The USA result by county is productive rural zone, not the urban pollution zones of coastal agent services. Those WHO sell themselves as Democrats neglected to include the majority while pandering to their own polluted glittering city self-importance. The red area should reflect green independence. This diagram shows that even though there is now a 50-50 split between rural and urban populations, the area covered by self-sufficient green philosophy village communities is far greater than the polluted urban huddle of welfare seekers who are dependents of the rural areas. However, the rural areas show a great affinity to patriotic nationalism and not green philosophy, even though they are self-sufficient in that they have food being thrust out the ground at them and have no need for anti-green cities who are destroying the lives of all with their lack of population control and subsequent lack of pollution control. Age group manipulation. This method uses the life experience of the moral development of the voters by age group within a zone. I first analyzed the relationship between the Kohlberg 6 stages of moral development and political voting tendencies in 2014, and here we have it in 2016 being the deciding factor for change. In the graph we see the adolescent who is still experiencing the growing pains of identity, relationships and role confusion with no life experience of community being given a vote to decide on the lives of the majority. This demographic will naturally choose the master student protection of the nationalist right wing. It is only later that the social theft this represents was lost during education at university, and that is now denied by financial social engineering of inequality. Group voting psychology based on population average intelligence. In the diagram we see the development age paths with teens following the influence of parental control and the master-teacher relationship and the teaching of winning races in sports or gaining higher grades in a frenzy of selfish gain. We see that some grow out of this into having a social conscience, but unfortunately we see in the next slides the majority never grow up and remain in the selfish mind of a child. Here we note the government trying to influence the voting by adding the lower teen demographic who notably have undeveloped identity and relationship issues. Those who argue that teens can have children obviously don't realize their ignorance in supporting those not having developed themselves, bringing up children who will suffer the same faults and failures of inexperience in development. Dogs on the street have children too, and they stay on the street. Intelligence division. This method uses the group intelligence of the voters within a zone. It is always touchy-feely to discuss group intelligence, as those without any generally resort to abuse or violence, which is the behavior of those further down the taxonomic tree who survive by survival of fittest physical ability rather than mental ability. Intelligence, and intellectual ability derived from it, is strongly related to education. You can't teach an old dog new tricks means that among other things the dog has reached its intelligence threshold, EQ, to absorbing more advanced knowledge and reasoning ability. The lower group naturally follows the right-wing patriarch. This game is played out in the rural areas where those with adequate strength to supply physical labor don't require a great deal of mental ability. The IQs of work types. This diagram relates the normal curve of IQ to quantity of job types. There has been a great deal of academic research made on this area of intelligence and ability, as has that of climate and weather patterns relating to seasonal variations. The stone positions of Stonehenge of some 3000 BCE related to sun, star positions relating to weather and crops. So far 5,000 years of academic analysis and observation, and prior to that of some 20,000 BCE in the Far East some astrological remnants relating stars and astrological signs to weather and psychological traits pertaining to seasons of birth. It must be noted the influence of astrology as a study of observed relationships, which only pertains to generic large seasonal time zones on Earth and not to the influence of planets or particular stars parsecs away, which have less effect on us than a butterfly fart in a strong wind. Move to a deeper study of astronomy and astrophysics, the peak of scientific thought supported by a deep growth in the language of mathematics. Deniers beware, they have thousands of years of study to contend against. Job spread as an averaged percent and IQ ratings. This diagram shows more detail on job and school years and qualifications related to IQ in populations numbers and their corresponding general voting preferences. It is interesting to note that those with professional qualifications of PhD, doctors, professors etc. are inclined to have political preferences in the green quadrant of the political compass, which is diametrically opposed and contra to large population control or financial control, federalism, and shows preference to training in responsible self-control and community participation. This is realized as the future to sustainable living and does not follow the growth in government rule but in small community, stronger local ecological group council responsibility. Intelligence Division Summary. Once the voting system is seen as being associated heavily with national corporate structure which leans to fascist tyrannical dictatorships, we can see that the voters are heavily influenced by personal gain and involve the majority below university graduate intellectual capability and so are open to being manipulated. This can be seen by the average level of entertainer, only having a qualification of high school leaver, that influences popular opinion, not having the intelligence of a brain surgeon or a research nuclear physicist or ICT mathematician, and nowhere near their comparably low pay scale, who are chosen based on their looks and musical dexterity or flamboyant or outrageous reality character rather than their ability to reason. This does not apply to all entertainers, as a minority are highly qualified from established seats of learning but in the media arts of emotional manipulation. Gerrymandering manipulation by area. How gerrymandering can influence electoral results on a non-proportional system. Example: for a state with 3 equally sized districts, 15 voters and 2 parties. Plum squares rural and orange circles urban. In A, creating 3 mixed-type districts yields a 3-0 win to Plum, a disproportional result considering the statewide 9-6 Plum majority. In B, Orange wins the urban district while Plum wins the rural districts. The 2-1 result reflects the statewide vote ratio 9-6. In C, gerrymandering techniques ensure an unfair 2-1 win to the statewide minority Orange party. This method uses the selection of voter areas in order to misrepresent the voting. Gerrymandering in the United States has been practiced since the founding of the country to strengthen the power of particular political interests within legislative bodies. This is not beneficial to public democratic involvement and closes them out. Partisan gerrymandering is commonly used to increase the power of a political party. In some instances, political parties collude to protect incumbents by engaging in bipartisan gerrymandering. The voters cast their votes blissfully free from the ravages of intelligence to realize their vote has already been cast for them. A very far cry from any democratic society. It is more fair to have group consensus than many marginally divided groups. In this diagram we see gerrymandering at work. Out of 50 voters split between, for example, red, rural, and blue, urban, we see a perfect representation of groupings. A compact but unfair division scheme mixing rural with urban so unrepresentative of the whole. A gerrymandered unfair scheme created to favor the red vote to win. Unfair manipulative gerrymandering appears in many disguises as we see in the following slides. First past the post manipulation. This method uses the highest vote quantity of the winning candidate or choice order to represent the voting without taking into account the overall total votes. This is more outrageous than the gerrymandering method in which the voter is unsure how his area is being partitioned. In the first past the post method, the voter is unaware of how many are voting. This is not a race as would be assumed from the name that the fittest fastest gets past the post first, but is a preamble based on who votes for the winner. This is a poor method to select a majority because out of 100 voters, if 99, the majority, decide the choices are unsuitable and only one vote is cast, that is the one that wins, making the result totally unrepresentative of the group and is the biggest national government scam of all. First past the post manipulation. Continued USA. Similarly to the vote result being ludicrous as a non-majority decision, each candidate may be assigned different numbers of voters or land area in a state. This is shown in the USA and the assignments of the state's reps population and inclusion of Washington, D.C. in presidential vote but otherwise mainly excluded. FPTP encourages tactical voting and making a gamble on the result rather than making a dedicated choice. This makes the whole voting system a farcical game and best to get away from it all in a foreign country that doesn't run the lives of its people like some TV game show. To a greater extent than many other electoral methods, the first-past-the-post system encourages tactical voting and consequent manipulation by major parties from minor parties to squeeze out the competition. Voters have an incentive to vote for one of candidates they predict are most likely to win, making it a gamble rather than a choice, even if they would prefer neither candidate to win. A vote for any other candidate is considered to be likely wasted and bear no impact or benefit on the final result they would prefer. First-past-the-post manipulation. Continued USA. This diagram shows the inequality in USA voter manipulation. Low population density rural votes Republican and high-density urban welfare city votes Democrat. A Wyoming representative, 196K, has less than one-third of a California, 712K, or Texas, 723, rep. Washington, D.C. appears as a rogue vote in Congress and suddenly appears as 3 in presidential voting. The USA is shown here as most data is available, however the UK is just as unbalanced, e.g. Iowa, 109K, and Orkney, 35K, each with 1 PM with no area data available, and EU is inconsistent like some hormonal motherland needing HRT with the mix of disproportional mixed member systems, so another scam of non-democratic voting representation. I would say the primal scream that has gone up in the past 2 years is to give democracy back from scam government intervention in voting. In the United States House of Representatives, the Washington district is represented by a delegate, who is not allowed to vote on the House floor but can vote on procedural matters and in congressional committees. D.C. residents have no representation in the United States Senate. The 23rd Amendment to the United States Constitution, adopted in 1961, entitles the district to 3 electoral votes in the election of the President and Vice President of the United States. First-past-the-post manipulation. Continued. Because FPTP permits many wasted votes, an election under FPTP is easily gerrymandered by the ruling party, making a unilateral change to the constituency map without a population vote being made on the change. Even worse, an electoral college system that acts twice on county votes and then the losing representatives handing their win to the majority group, so misrepresenting the state at federal level. Unequal candidate voter levels and land areas misrepresents any concept of consensus or fairness supported by politically untrustworthy people like Blair, Cameron and Churchill, effectively saying that small parties should not get a vote to represent their voters so they can make all the decisions unimpeded. Through gerrymandering, constituencies are deliberately designed to unfairly increase the number of seats won by one party at the expense of another. For example, assume a hypothetical pair of parties called Red and Blue. Red, the ruling party, redraws the constituency map such that Blue has a small number of constituencies in which it has an overwhelming majority of votes, and a large number of constituencies where it is at a small disadvantage to Red. Red will then win a large number of constituencies by a small majority, FPTP, while many of Blue's votes will be wasted on getting a large majority, which has no practical benefit under FPTP, in a small number of constituencies. Supporters of FPTP argue that it is the electoral system providing the best governance. It is not. It does not allow full representation of the people, hence the recent primal scream. Governance. Democracy is supposed to supply participation, not governance. It trades fairness in representation for more responsible government. No, it opens the path to tyranny. This allows government to make mistakes, like the ongoing conservative financial disasters since 1971, destroying the British currency in the negative trade balance with import much greater than export balance in the tens of billions. First past the post manipulation. Continued UK inequality example. FPTP squeezes out representation by smaller parties and promotes two-party systems who essentially share the same policies with only slight thematic differences, especially in corporate fascist-biased systems favoring financial inequality while promoting an illusionary haze of solving divisive minority inequalities. This diagram shows a ludicrous level of misrepresentation in the UK. First past the post manipulation. Proportional representation. Proportional representation is the method for manipulating representatives for multi-party government rather than use voting to represent the majority feelings and wishes of the general public. This has become unhinged when the referendum consensus rules conflicted with party systems and the Brexit was won on a consensus of majority votes denying the government its position. Similarly, representative rules has won the presidency of the USA rather than the majority vote, even with the addition of Washington, D.C. votes, which are usually strangely ignored even though those citizens don't live in a foreign bubble but do live on the same landmass under the same laws. First past the post manipulation. Continued proportional representation. Proportional representation is probably the worst voting scam of all manipulations used in many nations, especially Europe, where each participant nation has differing voting procedures and proportions. This makes fools of anyone who supports a EU government system, as it is not democratic and runs itself as a fascist central club of a self-appointed neo-aristocratic leadership group in Belgium who bias towards their paymasters and do not consider the rank-and-file members of the community being fleeced and causing financial discontent as well as social disarray with vast disruption with immigration issues to disguise their inability to solve the huge debt issues they have created by allowing wholesale social theft by the finance establishments who again need a financial catheter, or hoarding law, in order to instigate any kind of trickle-down. First past the post manipulation. Proportional representation explained. Proportional representation, PR, is arranged in a complex way in order to discourage any ruling group from creating a move against it. It is not complicated but is just clouded in a mist of vagaries, lists, etc., and moves the goalposts and boundaries on a playing field of quicksand under a veneer of fairness. It is one of the mixes of voting systems of plurality, majoritarian fair to citizens within ecological zones, but is non-transitive between urban-rural mix, proportional representation, government bias, and the mixed-member hodgepodge of control manipulation. In EU, PR tries to assign the same number of representatives as the voters support. If the nation or an area votes 30% for something, then that is represented as 30% in the number of representatives. The application is complex and fogs the voter's ability to make a decision as it is based on large areas and not specific zones. Urban-rural differences may be split, e.g. 30% favor 60-40 weighting between social consciousness and fiscal conservatism, welfare urban. 50% favor 50-50 weighting between social consciousness and fiscal conservatism, rural swing. 20% favor a 40-60 weighting between social consciousness and bottom-line fiscal conservatism, rural. While each voter may not assess the units of measure identically, the trend then becomes a single vector on which the consensus agrees as a preferred balance of candidate criteria. The overall results indicates if a large area is an urban or rural mindset. First past the post manipulation. Proportional representation, no choice. Proportional representation provides no democratic choice. In this diagram we see how political parties split between issues, making it impossible for voters to discern which one to pick for a decisive vote. Conclusion. The topic being voted on should be given different rules to attain some reality. An overall generic topic like a leader being different to a single defined referendum question like Brexit or should we all lie down and die. Under all circumstances the voters should be totally informed and understand the implications of their vote on others. For example, I voted the same as my mom as she always votes the same, being a prime reason to remove confidence in the voting result and to negate the vote results. Statistical tests should be imposed on voters in order to ensure validity of voter understanding. This was applied in the past and has fallen into allowing retard voting. After all, children are not eligible to vote although the voting directly affects them. Conclusion, continued. To still exist with some antiquated party bickering system since Roman times where both parties share each other's policies to the point of them overlapping to the extent of them being nearly identical, only identifiable by their success or failure of the generic policy. The solution is to have group voting on single topics per ecological zone selected to be transitive to neighboring zones. Each representative should be made personally accountable to their success and, as with any business, should be retained on merit of positive both social and fiscal achievement. If they bring conflict, war, poverty, starvation or economic failure, they should be ousted permanently. A government position should never be considered as a mere job. Conclusion, continued plus. The days of social unions and local votes and collective bargaining action being forefront and being spokesman for the underdog and downtrodden in order to gain a slice of the profit for their efforts has moved into the realms of National Socialism, Nazism, which is the way fascism grows by the patriarchal, the aristocratic, self-appointed elite stealing from society in ever-increasing non-productive unearned share or bond interests to keep the lifestyles of the working people and poverty in a continued struggle to stay alive, with contentment being seen as demotivating in a situation of growing social insanity. We observe that the multitude of primary social cancers can no longer be removed and the progress is past secondary and into the tertiary stage of economic collapse, that if a strong puff of wind, meteoric event or pandemic virus should hit the patient, there is no contingency for survival. As is well observed with the inability to deal with climate change effects. The end. Thank you for listening. Your votes of appreciation will not be taken as false democracy in the global fascist demonocracy. Voting scam is not appreciated here. Guy Lakeman. The more we look into the voting, the more we see the hundreds, thousands of members of society involved with this mass deception. These societies are not places to live a fulfilling life. Another Guy Lakeman peek and poke. The more we retrieve, the more we perceive. Believe and are grieved that they deceive. With the web they weave. Addendum. For those of you who have managed to absorb this presentation, we will be adding more following developments in Europe, where we are already observing a tilt towards the strength of farming communities. We may hopefully even see the poison center in Belgium disintegrate. After all, they did not do a very good job on Central Africa today. With the disintegration of Europe, that should put an end to the greed philosophy of the West, which is nominally made up of the USA, Europe and their already disintegrated creators, of India, Persia, Middle East, and Africa. With them gone, then maybe the Western world will not be the anti-social bitch fest it has become.